Hello, welcome to Module 6 of the Teaching Foundations course on high yield instructional strategies. I'm really excited to present this to you today. I find this fascinating. I think a lot of times we as teachers, when we look at our instructional strategies, we do a lot of the same things that our own teachers did. And many of them actually have been proven ineffective when it comes to some of the most recent research. So I think as you move through this, it will really bring some clarity as to some of the most effective strategies you could be using in your classroom. First off, it's really important to understand, and I think a lot of you do understand this, gauging from your responses in our last module, those discussion questions. Teacher beliefs play a very important part in how much students learn, how effectively they are learning. So the research tells us, first off, on intelligence, if teachers believe the students can get smart, then the students will get smart. They are going to rise up to the teacher's expectations. Beliefs about learning. We know that learning is constructed as learners assimilate new experience with prior knowledge. This is why we're always trying to activate that prior knowledge. Find out what students already know. Use those experiences as the building blocks to what you are going to do in the present and in the future in your classroom. Number 3, we know that learning varies with the degree to which learners' needs are met. In other words, many of our students are coming to us with needs at home, with socio-emotional needs, and it's important that we are helping to meet those so that students can learn at the highest level. Beliefs about teachers and teaching. The nature of professional knowledge encompasses areas of performance, repertoire, matching, not necessarily effective behaviors. We can constantly build upon these areas to improve our instructional strategies and what we're doing in the classrooms to make sure that we are being effective with students. The knowledge bases of a professional teacher are complex and require continuous study. And like I said at the very beginning, this is a very important part of being a teacher, staying up to date, really engaging in professional development, finding out those new strategies or even old strategies that are very effective. And then we finally have beliefs about schools and schooling. The total environment of a school has a powerful effect on students' learning. So many of you in the last module really reflected on creating a classroom environment that was engaging, that was compassionate, that was caring, and that definitely is an important component in how effective our student learning is. Racism also exerts a downward force, and this is something that we always have to be aware of, that we need to actively teach that anti-racism. So I'd like you to take a few minutes here and respond to your first assignment. This is going to be another discussion question in Google Classroom. I would like you to respond to what do you believe are 2 of the most important influences on student achievement and why. I'd like you to put your initial post up by November 6th and then have your 2 replies to your fellow teachers completed by November 13th. So go ahead and take a few minutes, pause the video here, and then come back and continue. So today we're going to be looking at the research of John Hattie. John Hattie is a professor of education and director of the Melbourne Education Institute at the University of Melbourne in Australia. And a few years ago, he completed a meta-analysis of the effect of different factors on educational outcomes. In fact, he looked at over 250 different factors that can affect students' education and how effectively they are learning. And he continues to actually work on this. And I'll share with you at the end a link where you can see some of his current research. For all of you statistics fans out there, Hattie uses the Cohen's d to represent the effect size. So Cohen's d is defined as the difference between 2 means divided by the standard deviation of the pooled groups or of the control group alone. Simply, that means that when you complete that average, an effect size of 0.40 is about the average effect that you would expect from one of these factors from a year's schooling. So we always want to make sure that we're using strategies that are going to be 0.40 or above. So we're going to take a look at some of those to see really what he found to truly improve student achievement. So here we have just 30 of the strategies that he has studied. Like I said, he actually studied over 250. So you can see on here everything from retention, meaning holding back a student a year in their grade placement, to professional development on student achievement, to direct instruction, things like concept mapping, feedback, student expectations. So what I would like you to do is to go to your Google Classroom and find the assignment on Hattie's meta-analysis, strategies and their influence. And then in your list, go ahead and review each of the strategies and type next to each one whether you believe it has a low, medium, or high impact on student achievement. Once you have completed that, come back to this presentation and you're going to be able to go to the next slide and actually review his findings and look at those effect sizes. And then finally, at the bottom of your assignment, please answer the question, did any of the findings surprise you? Why or why not? So at this point, you've completed your worksheet and you have ranked the influences according to low, medium, and high effect size. And you can see here the actual findings from Hattie's study. And I know personally, I find, some of them surprising, some of them not so much. I really like to concentrate on some of those highest strategies. And you can see, for example, number 26, reciprocal teaching. This is going to refer to an instructional activity where students are actually becoming the teachers in small groups. Teachers model, and then the students learn to guide their small group through 4 different strategies of summarizing, question generating, clarification, and prediction. And so, a lot of this actually has to do with the students taking on kind of the control of their own learning. I also think, very important, number 24, the metacognitive strategy programs. Again, this is going to include things like self-assessment, reflective writing. So I think it's very interesting that those have some of our highest effect sizes. Some of the lowest, some of the things that we're still seeing, ability grouping and tracking, learning styles. The research shows us that learning styles don't necessarily have a whole lot of effect on how effectively a student learns. So what I'd like you to do at this point is take a look at the video that we have here by Dr. John Hattie on ability grouping, and just kind of listen and think about how this is going to impact us in our own schools, our own district, and in our classrooms.
Well, tracking actually doesn't have a negative effect size. It has a very close to 0 effect size. And in many ways, that means it doesn't matter whether you track or you don't track, because that's what a 0 means when you compare tracking to non-tracking. The problem with tracking is 2 things. Firstly is the expectations it sets for kids. It says to them very clearly that this is where you perform. And certainly in some subjects, and probably mathematics is the best example, quite often what the teachers then do is they only teach material that's relative to that tracking. So even if you develop and become better at doing mathematics, and you may have the ability to go into a higher track, you can't, because you haven't done the right amount of subjects, you haven't done the right content area. But the biggest problem with tracking by a million miles is the equity issue. For instance, if you look in this country here, there is a high probability of African American and Hispanics being in the lower track groups. How can you possibly defend that apartheid in our schools? How can you possibly argue that kids are destined in terms of how they're going to succeed in life, depending on the colour of their skin? That's so indefensible. And so when you take that equity issue into account, and then you take, on the other hand, the effect size is close to zero, then I think it's incumbent upon us to find ways where we can reduce those inequity problems. And stopping ability grouping is one of the issues. Now, I have to be careful here. There is a detracking movement. There is a group trying to detrack, and it's not showing much effect either. And that, I think, is partly because we then don't come back to attend what really matters, and that is for each individual kid, what is the impact we're having on them? And so that's what I want to come back to. It's about that impact. And one of the problems of the tracking and the ability grouping is it does set expectations which may not be appropriate for many of the students. I am not a fan of tracking because it becomes, people think it's actually solving an educational problem. It's not. It's making the teacher's life easier. And there's nothing wrong with making teachers' life easier. But those teachers who are in a detrack situation, who do have high expectations for all their kids, not only can that be more successful, you don't get the equity problems that you do with tracking. So it's not a straightforward answer. It's not a straightforward problem. But I do think there are some serious problems with the tracking that really make it very hard to defend.
So for your next assignment, please go to your Google Classroom and find the document entitled Hattie's Work. What does it mean for us? You have 3 columns on the document. In the first column of your worksheet, I'd like you to write down the practices common in your school that have an effect size below 0.40. So take a look back at that list of 30 practices that we were reviewing. The next step then is that in the last column, in the third column, write down those practices that are common within your school that have an effect size above 0.40, the ones that Hattie has found to be most effective. And then finally, in the middle column, list those practices that you think you should be using to replace column 1, or those practices, when done in a proactive manner, have the potential for greater results. In other words, what are some things that are on the Hattie list that you think that you could incorporate to have a larger effect on student learning? So high expectations teaching. Now, this is what this is all about. Having high expectations of our students is the single greatest factor in student achievement. It's the expectations that are set by the teacher. We have all these assumptions when we're coming into it. And poverty does not have a large impact on student achievement. It's not home influence. It's not race. It's not student behavior. It's when a student is matched with a high-performing teacher, an efficacious teacher that engages in teaching practices that are effective, that we're going to see student performance increased. So, in other words, the direct impact here on increased student achievement is what teachers know, believe, and can do. For more resources on this, and if you find this really interesting, they are continuing to add to the research. They're continuing to add to the different factors, the different strategies. Take a look at the websites here on visible learning research and some of the learning resources on visible learning. Thank you.